we actually developed what we call dynamic safety boundaries.
I'm all about starting small incrementally and learning as you go.
And if you ever want to debate the pros and cons of regulation, you know where to find Peter.
Welcome back to another episode of Call Me Data. But today we have a special guest, Mery Zadeh from Luminova. Mery is the Senior Vice President of AI Governance and Risk Consulting from Luminova. And prior to that, Mery had I'd say a stellar career working for KPMG as the head of risk and control transformation.
Thank you, Peter. Looking forward to having this conversation today.
Oh, looking forward to it, Mery. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So before we jump into that, let's talk about some news this morning. So today is, as we're recording this, it's the 28th of August, 2025. And I think the big AI-related headline in the newspaper this morning was NVidia and their quarterly revenue numbers, which were pretty wild, right?
Yeah, I mean, 56% increase in revenue. That's, I'd say, pretty impressive. I guess we can say the death of AI is not yet happening.
Yeah, there's been so much talk in the last couple of weeks about whether we have a bubble and whether we're going to start to see a slowdown. And the fact that they are reporting 56% quarterly sales growth. And here's the part that really shocks me a little bit is that's excluding any sales to China because for obvious reasons, they have not been recording sales to China. So that's just purely rest of world sales, not counting China.
Wow. And I would say most of that's probably the United States.
I suspect you're right. I don't think they broke it out exactly by country, but yeah, I think you're right. Here's the other stat I found interesting. So that represents, if you just put their quarterly revenue of around almost 54 billion, let me look at the exact number. I'll have to look to see exactly what the right number, but it was 46 billion, I think, was the quarterly revenue number, 56% increase. If you think about that in terms of the Blackwell chip that they started shipping last year, that would mean shipping 72,000 chips a week for the whole quarter because they're around $30,000 per chip. So that's serious money.
Wow. That's some serious, and those are seriously complex chips that are massive in size.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's actually pretty wild. And I think the other interesting part to me, as we had talked about earlier, there were people calling a bubble on this whole market. And yet, even after a 56% increase in sales quarter over quarter, the stock fell 2% in aftermarket trading because Wall Street expectations were even higher than 56%. So clearly there's a lot of people out there who don't think there's any bubble happening yet.
No, I don't think there's any bubble happening anytime soon. I mean, I honestly think we're at the very beginning of the curve. And I think this is only going to get significantly bigger.
Yeah. Do you think anyone catches NVIDIA right now in the chip market? Like, how do you think NVIDIA is set, given that their heritage is sort of, I'll say, generic GPUs, how do you think they're going to do long-term against the companies that are coming out with more specialized chips and inferencing chips and things like that?
I think even those today are fairly limited market. And there are a number of players out there. I mean, there's Cerebras, which is one of them, Grok, which is another one of them, these highly customized inference chips. But they're unique, but they're not. I mean, what they do is they try to get rid of the latency between the chips is usually the issue. It's the delay. So the chips aren't running at 100% capacity, whereas these other architectures are really just massive wafer chips. So they reduce the latency between communication between the GPU units, which is why they're much faster. Barring a massive change in architecture, just underlying AI architecture, moving away from, how they build the models today, I don't see anybody dislodging them anytime soon.
I guess until quantum or something equally disruptive becomes a reality, right?
Yeah, if that ever happens in our lifetime. I'm suspected of that anyway.
Hey, you're the only person. You still remain the only person I know, I think, who has actually been close enough to touch a quantum computer.
Yes, exactly. And I think it will remain that way for a long time. So I don't think it's happening anytime soon.
So I don't need to worry about like relatives calling me up on Christmas morning saying, "Hey, I just got a new quantum computer. Can you help me set the clock?"
Not when you need like liquid nitrogen to cool the unit so you can actually do anything with it. Not happening. Unless you're going to fire that baby up in your basement, good luck.
Well, anyway, it was. I think that's enough on the news, but I think it was obviously a strong indicator. We'll have to watch and see whether other companies in the AI market have similar revenue growth. But certainly, the NVidia news I think, will quiet people for a while who are saying, making doomsday proclamations.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's. I ignore the doomsayers out there because I think that gets news, that gets eyeballs on content, and at the end of the day, I just don't. I don't buy 99.9% of it.
Well,
So
let's bring Mery into the conversation, because I think one of the things that, like, I feel like the timing of this conversation is perfect, because we've been talking
right,
over the last several weeks. We've talked a lot about agentic technology, and the last couple of conversations we've had, Peter, we've really focused on risks around AI and some of the harms that AI can do, and the concept of responsible AI. And we're going to bring those two threads together today, I think, and talk about, like, how do you start to think about identifying and managing the risks associated with agentic AI, which is, to be honest, it's something more people should think about. I don't think that many people are really thinking hard about this right now. Like, I don't run into many people talking about this. Do you?
no, absolutely not. In fact, I only have one friend that actually speaks about this on a regular basis. Normally the conversation is agents, agents, agents. Agents are going to take over the world. Everything is going to be done by agents. Nobody's pausing to think that having agents run amok in your organization is probably not how you want to operate, and that there is some real serious risks associated with agentic computing in an enterprise. And I think obviously this needs to be thought about very seriously if you really want it to be deployed on a wide scale.
So, Mery, what do you think? Do you think people are rushing headlong into agentic without considering enough of the risks, or where do you stand on this?
I think it sounds so interesting to start, deploying agents, but then we have to think about that is a fundamental shift in how we interact with technology. Agentic AI is like for 40 years we have been telling computers what to do, right? And now we're starting to tell them what to achieve. That's basically the essence of agentic AI. Like, they can now think, remember, and act, which is totally different than just like getting a prompt and do something for you, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Actually, I never. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that idea of like shifting from telling them what to do to just telling them the outcome you want to achieve is a huge difference. And it is sort of scary. But to your point, Mery, let's spend a couple of minutes going back and reorienting people on like what we're really talking about here with agentic, right? Because I think we've all seen the term get probably thrown around a little bit too liberally, and maybe never really, I think not always well defined. So why don't you start maybe by elaborating on your point about that distinction between, the old world when we told them exactly what to do, and the new world when we're telling them something much more goal oriented. Do you want to start leading us down that path, and yeah.
Me.
Sure.
So,
why not?
Yeah. I think it's the rise of the powerful like LLMs that was kind of like the engine behind what we have today, because now they can understand goals and make multi-steps plans and execute the task, versus like the assistants, boot assistants, where you just have a chatbot and you ask for like what is the inventory, and then you get an answer, right? So it's not magic, but it's just a specific architecture that is combining reasoning with the ability to take action.
Yeah, and that's a huge. So that's maybe one characteristic we can sort of pin to the board here of what makes an agent is what you just described, right? Which is, instead of asking for a simple one-step thing, you can sort of say, I want you to do this for me, and it will come up with a plan. It will develop a plan composed of multiple steps. Yeah, pretty big departure from how we're used to working with computers.
Definitely. And it's like if you have if LLM was a regular or a word class, if LLM was a word class calculator you use, having an agent is like an accountant you hire, right? You don't tell the accountant which buttons to push on the calculator, but you just tell him file my taxes and it just gets done, basically.
And there's a certain level of trust involved in that, right? Because like if I hire an accountant, you're right. I know when I hire the accountant that I'm not going to be able to sit in the accountant's office all day, every day and watch everything they do. So there's an implicit level of trust that I'm hiring an accountant who, knows what they're doing and is going to act ethically and responsibly and diligently, etc. Is that part of what you think about when we think about agents? Like, how much should we trust them?
Definitely. I mean, the trust, it has to be built on what kind of governance you have in place, right? It's based on what kind of risks are you willing to take as a company. Where are you stand? Where do you stand in terms of ethical use of AI and all those topics? Basically, it's about how much risk are you willing to take?
So it's an interesting way of putting it, because I think the same thing is sort of true with an accountant. To stick with that example, right? I could go hire a very conservative accountant and take, little risk, or I could hire an aggressive accountant who might say, well, I can maximize your deductions, but you might get dinged for a couple of things here and there if you really push it. So is that like, do you go through the same process when you're thinking about agentic AI? Like, how do you pick an agent or teach an agent to align to your level of risk, the level of risk you're comfortable with?
I don't know, Peter, if this question was for you or for me, but
no, it's for you, definitely. No, I'll chime in when I'm ready. Trust me.
Okay. So definitely, I think when you're building it, you have to be able to consider, like, you have to have a journey, like the same as you're doing with AI use case journey. We in Luminova, we also have a journey where we take AI use cases through, intake, build, development, and monitoring, and you have different risk assessments like questionnaires and impact assessments to make sure that when you are building that agents or use Gen AI cases, it doesn't really matter. You have to be able to know what are the risks, because you have to map it in order to be able to manage it and govern it.
So, I mean, Mery, I think, right idea in kind of measuring or assessing the risk of any agents before you put them into a production environment. I think that's normal behavior, and I think most firms, in some sense, when you're putting systems into production environments, there's a level of assessment on the risk and what is the impact if it goes down or this or whatever. But I think questionnaires or assessments only go so far. I mean, if you have a developer who is, willing to put something in production that maybe he's not the most honorable person on the planet, and he's looking to do something that maybe is unethical. How do you control these pieces of software, which can be incredibly complicated, from doing things that they shouldn't be doing? I mean, because I think you have to be able to prevent some of this programmatically in order for it to be really, truly effective. Don't you think?
Yes, definitely. I think it's important to understand what are the risks. Security risks that you're mentioning is just one of them. You can have operational risk, which is basically doing the wrong thing. Like it's basically more about the goal misalignment. You can have a compliance agent where you set it a goal, flag all the transactions, or reduce the flag transactions, right? And it achieved the goal perfectly by flagging nothing at all.
Could be a problem.
Yes, exactly. Or you can have like escalation loops where you have two agents, where one of was in inventory sees that the stock is low and keeps ordering, and then you have another agent which is in finance that see the cost is up, and it starts or freezes the procurement, right? And then you have the loop of ordering and canceling and ordering and canceling, right?
Right.
So, and then as you're mentioning, security risk, prompt injections, poison data. You can have you can have the agent being a malicious insider, right? Turning in against itself. You can lose the company's money. It's like having financial risk. We all remember I don't know if you guys remember Flash Crash from 2010.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely.
Or the Night Capsule in 2012, where the company lost $440 million in 45 minutes because of single code, flawed code that got
Yeah, I know all about that
reactivated.
one because I know the person that got fired because of that. So yes, I know all about it. But how do you prevent? I mean, look, so you're taking great examples. I mean, these are real world examples where somebody put either bad code or something in production, wind up costing a firm hundreds of millions of dollars in a couple of minutes. But now you're elevating. You're talking about tools that are orders of magnitude more complicated and have significantly more power, and they're
Yes.
basically goal seeking now. And you know as well as I do, I mean, LLMs are far from accurate. They hallucinate. What if you have the agent that all of a sudden thinks it's I don't know, super user god of the computer, and all of a sudden it's going to run utterly amok in your environment? How do you control something like that? Because there's no amount of governance that's ever going to control that.
I mean, you can have you have to have a governance that is combining basically technical controls with human oversight. That's the adult in the room, like the human in the loop. That is very important for AI in general and agentic AI. We have to talk about how we should basically deploy and implement it, having humans in the loop, because it could be a spectrum of interventions. You can have review and approve. You can have like checkpoints, decision checkpoints. You can have final go no go by a human. You can design agents to ask for help. Basically, when they understand where the confidence is low, if they understand that their confidence is low, so that's a risk as well. You can have monitor and override. But you should definitely have kill switches, right? You have to have the ability to just stop it and like cut it. So there are definitely, but it has to be technical tools as well. Like, for example, there are three main categories of risk. As I was giving examples, there are execution risk, where you have an agent takes action, seems reasonable, but then it's not in a context. And then you have compounding risk, where multiple agents interact and then their behavior becomes unpredictable. And then you have the governance risk. How do you maintain oversight, right? So when I'm talking about technical support, at Luminova, we actually developed what we call dynamic safety boundaries. So unlike static guardrails that just block the output, our system understands the context and intent. That's super important, that it has to understand the context and intent. So for example, if you have in financial services, you try to place a trade, our platform doesn't just check if it's technically valid. It evaluates if it's aligned with risk parameters, regulatory requirements, or like market conditions. So tools, human in the loop, and testing, I would say.
But let me say, I want to go back to what you said before about having these tools that understand the parameters, like what they should be doing or should not be doing and what's out of bounds. Are those just LLMs monitoring LLMs, or LLMs monitoring agents, or just other AI controlling agents? Like, how do you implement that?
I think, I mean, I'm not the most technical person, Peter, just to let you know, but it's agents, basically, monitoring agents. You just have to, I would say, agents.
Which makes sense, because I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
No, it's just, I think the interesting part about it is like, it all comes back, Mery, as you sort of said at the beginning, comes back to like, how do you define the goals, whether it's the goal of the agent that's doing the work or it's the goal of the agent that's providing some level of oversight. You've got to define the goals well. I think that's probably, for me, that seems like one of the scariest parts, because humans are notoriously bad at setting clear goals, right? Like, there's a reason that the law of unintended consequences exists, which is that we as humans are not always gifted with perfect foresight and don't always have the ability to anticipate what the outcome of our directives might be. So, It happens, right? Yeah. Well, it happens to me. Maybe it doesn't happen to Peter. Peter's the exception to the rule. But it definitely happens to me. Unintended consequences have been a big part of my life. So it's like, is there
Yes, all of
something
us, I'm
you
sure.
can do to help the people, whether it's the, upfront definition of a goal or whether it's their role as the human in the loop? Like, can you give people training? Like, how do you deal with that human
Definitely.
fallibility aspect?
Definitely training. You need to educate your people, because it's, if you have technical tools in place and super smart agent, it doesn't really help you if the people are the flawed ones, and it's, this is all about the operational risk, and the system will fail, the computer would fail, and the people will actually fail as well. We just have to have right controls in place to make sure that they are educated enough and they are asked in the right place. The escalation comes in a right place. You don't have to escalate everything to the human, but if you have an expert, you just have to, in the right moment, to the right expert, right? And so some sort of governance around it. When you have you can have maybe authority matrices explaining like the thresholds of who is responsible for what in.
Yeah, and I like the idea that you can use some measure of materiality to decide what sort of approvals or decisions or checkpoints can be handled by an agent or some other non-human overseer, and what escalates to the level of it requires human intervention. I say that, but it's always, I realize as I say that, there's an implicit bias that I'm sort of assuming that human intervention is somehow better or more accurate. And that's probably also a really bad assumption, isn't it?
Biased, probably.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second because that's what I love to do. Having a long career in engineering, I'm masterful at getting around compliance and regulatory issues because they get in the way of progress. And I find them just to be a big impediment, generally speaking. I want to get things done. That's me, always been that way. I like to go around people and get things done. So I hear governance and paperwork and controls and this and that. And, the whole thing behind agents and just LLMs in general is to be able to go faster. So clearly I'm going to ignore all this stuff. I guess my point is I don't want to slow down. Nobody wants to slow down. I mean, I think when you're trying to deploy some of these things, and the whole point of them is really to accelerate business and make business better overall and easier for humans to focus on high value tasks. How do you make a developer feel better about this? That they're not going to slow down. They're not going to be, strangled into not doing, what I'm saying, to do their job. Somebody's watching over them and telling them they can't deploy this newfangled trading agent that's going to make the company billions of dollars.
I mean, I totally understand your point. And I see that compliance might be very costly and time consuming. But on the other hand, I also think that how can we facilitate for the developers to be faster? Yes, it's by making them understand. I mean, give them a framework that is so easy and is so well set up that they can do what they are best at doing instead of doing governance. The developers are not supposed to do governance. You have governance people for that, AI governance people for that. You have second line doing that, right? So maybe first one is to have the clear roles and responsibility in between who is doing what. To have, I usually say that if you want to have efficiency in a process, you just have to understand whose responsibility is this. Like, am I doing the governance? So my point is, have a clear roles and responsibility, establish that, have clear governance for the ones that are supposed to document it, and also clear framework for the developer to see. For example, if he's supposed to do pre-development testing, he has to know what the requirements are. Maybe the developer doesn't know that, but the legal counsel does. The AIC, chief of AI officer or something, he knows that, right? Or she knows that. So we have to have cross-functional teams that work together to enable the developer to work best in what he's good at developing, right? So risk and compliance and frameworks should be part of someone else's job to make sure that it's so easy to deploy. I'm going around this point, but
So but this sounds like a challenge for a lot of organizations. Like most organizations are struggling to get enough engineering talent to develop modern AI solutions, let alone agentic solutions. Then if you go out and you tell them, oh, and you also need a level of expertise to provide the governance and the oversight to partner with those software engineers, right? Like in that maker checker model you described. Where do these people come from? Like, is it a real challenge today, do you think, for companies to provide that level of governance?
I think so, definitely. It's as you're saying, it was difficult before with the risk and compliance with the risk and compliance people, and now we have to have another layer. And if you only hire data scientists, you're gonna miss, another part, like the business glasses. You will miss like, and maybe I don't want to offend anyone here, but maybe you missed maybe you're missing like the strategic business views, because I'm sure there are a lot of great data scientists that knows much more than me about business. But I'm just saying we need different. We have to have diverse group basically in order to make sure that, and also
Now,
we have to. If Go ahead, sorry.
no, I just want to pick up on your point about that diverse view and having the business perspective, because you're right. Like from a data science perspective, I may be able to articulate what some of the risks are, what some of the failure modes will be. But that business perspective is the one that brings in and says, okay, but some failures are much more acceptable than others, right? I could fail at this part of a task with minimal impact, but if I get this part wrong, I've got a tremendous negative impact on my customers, my company, whatever it is, right? So you're right, that business view to sort of not treat every risk as equal is probably also really important.
Yes, that's probably why we have those regulation and guidelines coming in with trying to set like a framework for where we can operate and where is the playground basically.
So I want to talk a little bit about regulations and guidelines in a minute, or some of the frameworks out there, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on like where we are as a world in developing these things. But like I'm dying to know, have you got any good juicy stories about like agents out of control and what can happen? I think, like when I talk to people, sometimes they all have this sort of intuitive fear that an agent could go rogue and do something it's not supposed to do, but no one's really talking about what that actually looks like. Have you seen any cases where agents have sort of gone off the reservation and done crazy things?
Other than the old, no, there are. I mean, I have only success stories from Luminova.
It's good.
We have no. We actually helped a major client deploy Agentic AI, and they went from Copilot to processing millions of transactions in 8 weeks. I was like, that's the success story for you, David. But I mean, that's the interesting with the agents. Like, there's so much upside that we're just hearing left and right about like KYC processes that are getting 50% less manual work. We have HR and talent agents, acquisition agents. We have smart traffic agents. We have insurance claimer. It was something I heard as well, like like a chatbot that can cross-check evidence and approve low risk payouts, for example. We have retail. I mean, in retail we can mention Amazon. Like they have autonomous customer service to all the way to inventory, robotics inventory. They have warehouse logistics. So there's a lot of success story, which is the interesting part of this, and that's why people tend to be more not thinking about the risks as much.
Yeah, I could see where people would be so enamored of these success stories and say, I want to get some of those benefits, that, you might be tempted to rush into it without properly considering the risks.
Yeah, you could, I mean, some of the, we have stories about credit card companies, like giving where they are trained on biased historical data, giving men higher credit rates. I mean, this is one of the classical ones. You have, and that's the ones that regulatory impact of that would be that if you have only one PR case, you would be the repetition risk of that is so high that you might be out of business. If you're a small startup company.
I guess what I was going to say is, though, I feel like right now we're kind of at the beginning of the road. So I think most companies are doing are called the low-hanging fruit, the things that are not uber risky, that if they go sideways, there's not a lot of reputational risk, or they can pick up manually. Again, this is the beginning of the journey, but as they get sophisticated, as they get comfortable using the technology, they're going to go into much more difficult areas. The agent workflows are going to get more complicated. They're going to do more complex things. They're going to do them faster.
Definitely.
And I think I would think you start seeing at some point some of the failures, and some of those failures are going to be big. It's just a matter of reality.
Definitely.
We
have all those risks that they will definitely, they will be unpredictable. I mean, agents on multi-system agents will definitely be unpredictable, because even though you have experts agents in that multi-system agent, still it makes it more unpredictable, basically.
Well,
so that's why.
I'm sorry, no, finish. You thought.
So that's why you should do, pre-deployment testing. I'm not saying that there will be a whole answer to the whole answer to that, but I'm saying that you should definitely do pre-development deployment testing by having this sandbox environments. You should have red teaming in that environment to make sure that you have the real world, but without the real world consequences, basically.
Right, but I look at it this way. Again, I've built big systems, global systems, and you're never going to identify every single path the code can take. There's just an unlimited number of paths, effectively. But in traditional programming, you can at least narrow it down significantly. Doesn't mean you cover it all, but you can narrow it down, because these systems look for specific things. It's procedural languages. It's just the nature of computer programming. But now you're getting into LLMs, which are statistical and in many cases non-deterministic on their output, using unstructured data in a lot of cases to make decisions. So testing becomes, if not impossible, almost impossible. I mean, yes, you can test, but you're never going to test all the outputs, and not in a million years, especially in an LLM that's been trained on petabytes of information and has a trillion plus parameters. There's no way you're going to test that. So how do you control? I guess my point is no real effective way to control that.
No, you would never be 100. I mean, we were never 100% compliant with anything before Gen AI either.
Right. No, I agree.
If anyone claims that.
That's an understatement.
I love that statement, because we were Peter and I were having a spirited debate a couple of weeks ago about like self-driving cars and other technologies, and the same thing is true. Like the comparison shouldn't be how do you make an AI agent perfect and infallible. It's how do you make it at least as safe as the baseline of humans doing the job, because you're right, compliance failures occur all too frequently already. Humans make mistakes, whether they're intentional or unintentional. So I think Peter raises a good point, which is like, we have to give up on the idea of having perfect controls over an agent that are infallible. But I guess what should our goal just be? Make it X% safer than a human?
Yeah,
I guess I go back to, do we even have a framework that's really going to work in the long term? Because I feel like in many cases, we're using existing processes and procedures that worked for existing systems to a large degree. And as well as like frameworks and regulatory and compliance are always backwards looking, and they're really forward looking. But how do we get control of these incredibly powerful tools, or do we even want control of them going forward? And like, what do you like if you're speaking to a CEO and she's all excited about agentic computing, it's going to save them billions of dollars, it's going to revolutionize their business, and like, what do you tell them from a risk standpoint? Like, how do you can't say, well, I don't know how you control it. It can have a unlimited number of outputs. What can I tell you?
Well, I would say that they have to start. They have to have a governance in place. That's non-negotiable for me. Like, do you have to, even though you don't know how to control it, you have to still do a risk assessment to be able to know what you cannot control, right? So it's like right now we don't know what is out there. But for me, it's like you need to have a governance in place in form that let's do a risk assessment. Let's pick a guideline and
Right.
try to understand what are we building here, what are the risks, are we doing? What is the public? I mean, what is the risk for? Is it cybersecurity risk? Is it any threat to public safety? Is it privacy? Just understanding your risk will be helpful to have controls in place, because we do have some frameworks in the market to basically give a how to manage your risks. It's not going to be perfect, but you will have control in place. So for me, it would be like you have to do your risk assessments, your impact assessments to understand what you have in house, and then going forward, you have to have a risk-based control system that gives you some sort of confidence that what you're building or the outputs of the agents are something within your thresholds for
Right.
risk, right?
But does that give you a false sense of security?
It might give you, but it gives you some. I mean, if you don't do none of those, you have no idea what your risks are and what your controls in place, right? But if you at least do some of it, you have some sort of a insurance that some sort of what you're doing, some part of what you're doing is correct. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Now, is there ways to, I don't want to say proactively manage this, but proactively assess how these agents are running over periods of time so that you kind of profile them and you get a sense of how they're operating in given circumstances and, project out, well, we know if they do this and we see some indications of behavior that might go sideways, we can now deal with it before it becomes a real problem. Because I feel like you almost have to do something like that in order to get control of these rather sophisticated tools that are meant to think on their own.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not. We have evaluations both for Gen AI models, but also agentic, based on all the prompt injection, bias, fairness, all that, and also continuous monitoring. You have to continue monitoring and you have to get alerts basically when something goes off. Also, you should have guardrails. So to stop it, to block it before it gets out of hand.
Right. Like I'm almost thinking of like, individuals who have a psychological profile of somebody, but having a psychological profile equivalent for an agent. We know how it operates. I don't know. Just thinking.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny because that's a time-tested version of like employee surveillance, right? If you have employees and you know what time they go to work, you know how many pages they print, if anyone prints anymore, certain behavioral markers, and they start changing those behavioral markers all of a sudden, that's been proven to be an early warning indicator of potential fraud or employee defection or whatever things, right? So sometimes it's just stuff you want to avoid, like an employee leaving, but sometimes it's real problems like committing fraud. So I imagine you could over time start to sort of create those behavioral markers for agents and then have another set of guardrails that's when an agent starts behaving wildly differently. Now, that could be, it goes back to, it could be data drift, could be bias working its way into a model, who knows? But you'd want to know that. Love the idea, though, as you said, Mery, that like you have to start by understanding those risks. You have to sort of prioritize those risks, know what the biggest risks are, and you're never going to go to bed at night thinking all my agents are 100% safe and fully managed. It's going to be, I know what the biggest, most problematic risks are, and I've put in place measures to greatly reduce the likelihood of those things being able to actually come to fruition. Is that kind of a safe way to look at it, do you think?
Yes, definitely. You should have the either build it in-house, or basically get a tool which gives you the confidence that you have governance in place that ensures that agents are operating within the defined boundaries, and then you should have evaluation and continuous monitoring and observability into what agents are doing and how they are set. So basically a black box it's not going to work in the future.
So
And
let's add a wrinkle to that, though, because you mentioned black box won't work. And yet, one of the challenges that I think a lot of organizations are dealing with now is increasingly their AI capabilities are coming to them embedded in software as a service, in vendor provided software and packages. And yet, I think pretty much these days everyone agrees that as the operator of a business, you're accountable for what your AI does, regardless of whether you created it in-house or licensed it from someone else. Any special thoughts about like how this works when you don't actually have visibility into the internal development and training process and testing process for that agent? Do you just have to double down on guardrails and observation, or what do you do in that situation?
I mean, you have to double down on explainability at least. Maybe it's not much effort, but you just have to make sure that they are documenting. I mean, the developers are documenting while they're building. Not everything is meant to be shared, but some easy steps, like you need to have initial goal of that agent. You need to have the reasoning steps, the tools that were called, right? And the data, everything that was received, what kind of training, and then the final output. So if you're documenting, I would say enough, if you have it, if you make a template, you have a technical report that you're supposed to fill, and if the developers and the teams have that templates, it's much easier for them to know what to document, and then if they're documenting that process, the reasoning behind it, then it's not a black box. I mean, total black box anymore. It's more like we're working ourselves toward a glass box. Never going to be a glass box probably, but it's basically having the right, templates, frameworks. I'm going back to the frameworks, but frameworks in order for the developers to be able to work easier. They just know that they have to document this. And
let's talk about the frameworks, because I'm keen to get your thoughts on where we are today as far as either voluntary frameworks or even emerging regulation around agentic AI. Have you been following that space? Do you have any thoughts on what some of the better frameworks are out there?
We have, of course, we have NIST, which is a how-to guide for businesses, to like a practical guide focused on setting safety and testing standards. And you have ISO, which is a global certification, ISO 42001. There's a lot of different ISOs, but 42001, which is a global certification where the companies will have a formal AI management system. You have the executive order, which is whole government approach on safety and security, but basically just, it's not mandatory. It's just guidelines, the same with NIST and same with ISO. And then you have EU AI Act, right? EU AI Act is the first AI act in the world's first EU, regulation on AI. And it's very interesting because it's super strict. It has a risk based approach. You have 4 different type of risk. You have the unacceptable risk, when you put public safety in danger. I'm exaggerating a bit, but then it's an unacceptable risk. You have high risk when when you're dealing with privacy, with PIIs, and most of the agents actually would fall into the high risk category, at least the high risk category. And then you have medium risk and low. I could give you an example of that, but let's not go necessarily into that. This came in summer 24, but it would enter into force in several stages. So the unacceptable risk is entered into force in beginning of 2025, and then the high risk will be entering in force in end of 26. End of 26.
If I want to hear more about this, but just like the part that I perked up when I heard is I didn't realize that most agentic AI solutions would fall into the category of high risk. Is this going to have a damping effect on the development of agentic AI within the EU?
That's the interesting debate that is happening in Europe, because you have two groups, basically. The one group that thinks that this is definitely and totally an innovation killer. And then you have another group that think this is an innovation enabler. This is like the God's gift to be, give companies confidence to invest, and it's building public trust, and which is essential for the large and stable market.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
No, please.
Every note where I fall on the side of this. That's why I'm jumping in. So I think there is always empirical evidence to support. I shouldn't say there's a lot of history. I should say so there is history here, and I think what we've seen because of the heavy-handed regulations coming out of the EU, GDPR, some of the other ones out there, really constraining AI development. That there has been, I mean, I'm not exaggerating, zero innovation coming out of Europe when it comes to anything with AI.
Zero.
So I think the regulations have been incredibly effective in that they've stopped everything. So, you're not going to have agents, you're not going to have AI, you're not going to have anything. I guess that's my take on it.
Other than some of the great stuff coming out of Anthropic lately, which I think you and I are both fans of. But yeah, look,
yes.
I have to apologize. Me bringing up regulation in front of Peter was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. I was looking for a reaction there.
You don't know why you asked that question, because you know how I was going to react. And I have a Milton Friedman quote already, ready for this.
Trot it out, by all means. Let's go.
There you go.
No, I'll paraphrase. Wait, come on. If you ever follow Milton Friedman at all, which I am a fan, arguably, and he had this whole conversation with Phil Donahue back in the 70s, and Phil Donahue was going off on how regulations are critical, and the government has all these regulations, yada yada yada, and he pointed out quite accurately, where are the fairies in government that is so perfect that they can come up with regulations that are infallible? At the end of the day, they're humans. They're making regulations. And I think in many cases, a lot of these regulations are born out of fear, and this is what drives them. So, and you're trying to get ahead of a problem that doesn't yet exist, and in doing that, you're developing these all-encompassing regulations that are impractical from an implementation standpoint. Like, they will never be there. And I, as an entrepreneur, and having been one a couple of times, I have never found regulations to be enabling to me. I have found them an expense and an impediment. I have never found them be enabling and really want me to go out there and, I'm going to do something great because there's regulations there. That is not the case. And I don't know any entrepreneur that feels that way unless they're building compliance systems.
It's a whole business.
Yes, it is. And you know what, though? Who makes a lot of money in banks these days? Lawyers and compliance people.
Yes, there is So that was a good point. That was a good point, Peter.
Occasionally I come up with a good point. Once in a while.
It was a mic point. Mic drop. But yeah, I totally understand that, because I mean, I lived in Norway for 25 years, and I won't say it's a lot of enablement of innovation in general, because it's of course Europe is more regulated in general, and that's also the arguments that these innovation killers have, that they think that cost of compliance is so high that you only opening up for the big players, right? So you don't, the startups, you would just kill them because they don't have
exactly.
like 10 people working in compliance and buying tools and have different systems. So you're killing them. It's also so you're building basically what is a regulatory moat.
Yes, and the other thing I always counter with all of this, and there are bad actors in the world. Let's just face reality. There are countries that don't feel the same way that EU feels, the United States feels about safety and responsible AI and doing the right thing, that they don't care about this stuff. And they're going to go gangbusters ahead because they're going to use it for, potentially nefarious types things, military operations, spying, whatever it may be. So they're going to get a leap, and we don't want them to be ahead of where we are. And I think by imposing a lot of these regulations, we are in effect slowing ourselves down. And that's not the right. I know it's kind of conversation went in a different direction, but that's always been one of my big issues with imposing a regulatory framework on this type of technology.
Yeah, I mean, the more strict it is, the less innovation in one hand, and this is my my other hat, not the internal auditor, consultant hat, but more like entrepreneurship in my mind. So I understand it totally is more difficult for the startups to have access to data in Europe, because you have GDPR, we already had GDPR, and then the EU AI Act came as a layer on top of it. So they have a permanent disadvantage compared to US and China, basically, because the much easier access to data. But on the other hand, go ahead.
No, I
David,
found
on the
it
other
interesting
hand,
when you pointed it to the regulatory moat, because I'm sure we all remember that it wasn't too long ago that Sam Altman raised a lot of eyebrows when he started publicly calling for increased AI regulation. And a lot of people looked at that as, okay, now that he's at the helm of a company that's an early leader in the space, he wants to create that regulatory moat. He wants to use regulation to inhibit the ability of upstart companies to encroach on the territory he's won. And I think, that is something that happens with regulation. As you said, Mery, it sometimes favors the incumbents and the larger organizations at the expense of the small upstarts.
Right. And
yeah.
we saw it in banking post Dodd-Frank. We saw what happened. We saw how there have been, you can literally count on one hand the number of new banks because of regulations, the cost of the regulatory moat. It's been impossible to start a small bank, competitive bank.
At the same time, I think, I'll put in my my hat for a minute and say these regulations, as imperfect as they are, it's hard to imagine a world without some of them, because
Yes.
the risks are so real, right? Like, it's frustrating that the regulations are so terribly written and so clumsily conceived. Like, that's just human failure. And it's bureaucratic failure, and it's a failure of the system that creates regulations. Like, you can't argue that.
Yes.
They're terrible. But life without them would be really terrifying, I think.
Yes.
No, and I agree. There has to be something there. And I guess it's always been to me, what is the right level? And clearly with agentic computing, you need some level of control. You need the risk frameworks. You can't just look. I'm not advocating for having free running agents in an organization. That's not the way that's not reality.
No, not at all. And I like to have frameworks in place, right? Because if you have agents like operating like pilots and doctors, like when we want them to be certified, when we want them to have enough knowledge and controls in place, and also just to be for like building trust. I like the analogy of like if you have a brake on a fast car, it makes it go faster.
You're right. I think that's a good point. I think David and I had a whole discussion about lawyers and doctors on the last podcast, and would we actually license models? So yes, I think you have to build trust in these models. So you have to put some frameworks around them and some controls around them, because I don't want to talk to a model that is some medical model, some doctor model that starts prescribing things that have absolutely nothing to do with whatever I'm complaining about. I want to have some faith in it.
And I like that you picked the analogy of a car. So 100%, right? A car going around a racetrack that has curves and embankments on it has to have brakes. Doesn't matter how powerful it is. If it can't slow down, you'll never make it around the course at speed. What I like about that analogy is it also brings to mind that we're talking about something different than we've talked about with software in decades past, which is software has been operating in sort of a virtual environment. Yes, it was making credit decisions, it was writing marketing text, etc. But like, we're talking now about agents that have real physical impacts on people too. We're talking about physical safety. We're talking about agents that schedule transportation, agents that are involved in self-driving cars, agents that are taking on tasks that can actually have real world physical manifestations of what the agent does. And I think that makes it maybe even more immediate. Not that your day wasn't completely ruined if an AI model made a faulty credit decision on your behalf, but it wasn't ruined with the same impact that a out of control self-driving car would ruin it. So I feel like the stakes, I guess my point is the stakes of AI, including agentic AI, going off the rails are only getting higher as more and more parts of our daily lives are influenced by it.
And you've seen a lot of relevant articles in the paper fairly recently. So I think there's real concern here, especially when it comes to things like mental health and individuals considering suicide and telling it how to tie a knot and all this other stuff, which is honestly frightening.
So I think we should have some sort of regulation, at least when it comes to public safety. So anything that can affect people's safety. That's why GDPR was so popular in Europe when it came, because it was protecting people's rights. It was giving people the right to be having different rights, and maybe we can have a regulation that is focused on public safety and what explaining the intent of agents when it's about, I think I said public safety 3 times, but
yeah, no, I get it. I think you're right. I think it needs, at a minimum, we need to have a strong view towards public safety. And I think, look, I'll say this from a very, domestic American point of view. The other thing that has to be clear, and I hate that this is the reality, but the reality is legal liability has to be clearly established, right? If you look at, I'm not going to go into Article 238 or whatever it is, and all of the ways in which content providers can dodge liability for internet content, but it's a mess. I think if you go back to the idea of, like, think about a crew on a military sailing ship in the 1800s, right? The way that you got accountability was that captain is ultimately accountable for everything that happens on that ship. And that captain is therefore strongly incented to know what's going on, right? And that concept carries through to an airline captain today, right? Once that plane leaves the ground, the airline captain is the ultimate authority, and everything is he is accountable for everything that happens. What we need with Agentic is that same, I think, we need that same clear accountability. We need it very clear that companies that deploy agentic technology are accountable, are liable for what those agents do. We saw the case, I looked it up while we were talking a second ago. It was the case that happened in 2024 with Air Canada, where I don't know if you remember this one, but this is a passenger who used an AI chatbot to ask about the rules for bereavement fares, and was told erroneously that they could take certain steps, purchase a ticket now, and then retroactively supply documentation and get I think it was a partial refund, but somehow qualify for the bereavement fare. That was the wrong information that the AI chatbot gave them, and Air Canada refused to make them whole. And they said, that wasn't us, that was an AI agent that did that, and we're not accountable for that. At least in Canada, the courts ruled against Air Canada and said, nope, it's your agent, you own it, you operate it, you're accountable for what it does, pay the man. But, like, we have to have that in this
definitely
world. Do you agree with that?
Definitely, I agree, because that's the interesting part with the agents now, because who is really responsible? Is it the LLM? Is it the act? I mean, this the person give it a goal? If you have a multi-agent system with 5 agents, if you have a manager and then specialist agents and then one of them is doing something wrong, who would be responsible? The CEO of the company, the compliance guy, the developers? We
would argue, Peter, that if you get the liability clear enough, you can lessen your dependency on regulations, because it comes back to capitalism, which is, if I know I'm accountable for something, I am now incented to be careful. I'm incented to take the proper precautions and to manage the risks. If I think it's someone else's problem, now I've lost the incentive to do the right thing. So I don't know. I mean, I'm probably being very naive about this, but I feel like if I were really on the hook, you wouldn't have to regulate me as heavily, because I would be financially incented to get it right.
I just think it's so hard to establish liability in so many of these cases. I mean, let's take the example of, so Canada was using a foundation model. Air Canada was, whoever else, they used a foundation model. Now, is it whoever provided data to the foundation model for training purposes? So I guess my point is, like, where does liability actually stop? I mean, where does it begin? Where does it stop? And I guess it's so hard in so many cases because, look, these are different animals. This is not, I'm building a product, therefore I'm responsible. If I build a faulty product, it's my problem. I own responsibility. If the blender that I made blows up while you're making your whatever, I'm clearly responsible for poor manufacturing. This case, where does that liability extend? Does it go down to the person that created a document that was inaccurate, that now got part of a model and statistically, what I'm saying? Like, where do you go? That's why it's not. I think this stuff is so complicated now. I think it's very hard, and you gotta be very careful when you talk about regulations and risk management and all this other stuff. You gotta be very careful because the implications are can be devastating because I guarantee you go to China, they don't care. There is no liability. Nobody's getting sued. They're all about let's be aggressively pick, make the best models because we want to win at this game and we're going to do everything possible. That's my fear. I'm not saying operate with no laws and no rules and no liability. It's just we got to be very, very, very cautious. And I feel like, especially with AI, everybody is running so fast. Every politician on the planet is up there pontificating about something when they could barely spell AI. They're putting laws around it. And I'll stop at that point and shut up.
But like,
Yeah, Peter wound up.
I'm off my soapbox now. I'm done.
No, but I go ahead.
After you, Mery. I'm sorry.
I do agree with an analogy. I do agree with what you're saying, Dave, Peter. But also we need to have. I think we just have to start. We don't have to have control. That, as we discussed, we don't have to have control over everything and all the outputs and all the data. I mean, data we should have control over, but we should just start small, and then build it like going forward.
I agree. I'm all about starting small incrementally and learning as you go. I am not about GDPR and we're going to control the universe because we've thought about every possible risk on the planet so effectively that we're going to go back to using an abacus.
And the best way to avoid over regulation is to self-regulate really effectively, right? So as you're saying, Mery, let's get going. Let's make sure that everyone is using some of these frameworks that are out there and putting appropriate effort into governance. And
also sorry to interrupt, and also having cross-functional teams that are working together and understand and educate your teams to actually working together. If you already have a compliance team and developers, they should be talking. They should not, and MRM, like model risk management, coming at the end of just to validate. You should involve people in order to have a better successful process.
So that's a great segue to sort of a wrap up segment, which I was going to ask you, Mery, like, what's your best advice for people who are, if they've listened to you and they've said, wow, I've underappreciated how much I should be focusing on governance of these agents that we're going to be creating. And now I'm convinced I get it. What would you tell them to do? So you just gave us one good tidbit around, cross-functional teams with engagement throughout the life of the project. Any other sort of golden nuggets of how you would tell people to get started in this?
I would say, I would first say that I would encourage them to think about this question, and it's because the question isn't about using agentic AI. Right. This is coming, like it is there, but it's about how do you do it without betting your company's reputation on every autonomous decision, right? And I think that's what I think when I say like the platforms like ours. I'm sorry, but also there are a lot of. That's where I say that platform like Luminova becomes essential as an infrastructure and not just optional add-ons, but in addition to actually having clear, ownership, as David was saying, maybe having an AI governance board, but also when monitoring continuously. Like you should have of course, you should have a framework and you should have a risk assessment, but monitoring, maybe going from black box to black box recorder, right? And then plan for interventions.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Plan for human in the loop, checkpoints, and the right human in the loop as well. Kill switches.
Yes. So glad you added that last point about the right human in the loop. That's something Peter and I have gone back and forth about a few times, which is, yes, human in the loop is 100% the right thing to do for many, many cases, if not most. but it has to be the right human. It has to be a human who's trained the right way, who has skills, who has been taught how to be an effective supervisor to an agent or an AI model. It can't just be any random human is better than the agent, right? That will never work.
No, that'll never work.
Because tools are half of it. You need to educate your people. You need to have right people.
Yes, 100% agree with that.
Now you're talking our
Education
language.
is critical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking, yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I think you're absolutely spot on. And a lot of it is education.
So what do you think is going to be, Peter, question for you and for Mery, like what's going to be the new excuse in the world of agentic 10 years from now? Like when I was a kid, it was the dog ate my homework, right? And now it would be the agent ate my homework, right? Like, I don't know what happened. My dad's agent must have eaten my homework file. What do you have any other anything else that you want to predict about like what's going to be the new agentic excuse in the future?
I don't think it's going to be 10 years, to be totally honest. I think it's going to be like a year or so before people start.
I'm going to start using next week. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that meeting. My agent must have deleted it. Like,
that's a good one. I should use
that is
that.
a good one, actually. I like that.
Because everyone will be like, ooh, you have an agent managing a calendar. That's cool.
Yes. Oh, I happened to book me on a trip to the Caribbean. I guess I got to go. Damn. Hate when it happens. I honestly don't know. I couldn't even think of what, look, these things I am sure they can be wildly unpredictable for a long time.
Yeah, and to Mary's point, expect them to be unpredictable sometimes, but know what the risks are and pick which of those outcomes you really need to put guardrails around so that, right. Because to your point, if it books me dinner at the wrong restaurant, I'm okay. If it books me a $5,000 trip to the Caribbean on the wrong week, that's a big problem.
Or right. I'm still okay. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, that was actually a bad example because like there is no wrong week to go to the Caribbean.
I don't understand. Dave, what's wrong with this picture here? I mean, maybe you don't want to go. I'll happily go in behalf.
Fair enough.
Come on, you're wearing a Hawaiian shirt for God's sakes. I mean,
fair enough.
Anyway,
well, Mery, thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. It's great to get your viewpoint on this and hear from your time working in the trenches of agentic, what people are doing. So I really appreciate you joining us.
It was such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And, thank you for another being on Call Me Data. And as we always say, if anybody has questions, concerns, otherwise you'd like to book, David on a trip to the Caribbean, please reach out to us.
Yep. And if you ever want to debate the pros and cons of regulation, you know where to find Peter.
Yes. Everybody, have a great day. And thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us over on YouTube. And make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well.